I'm lying here, listening to the laughter and other sounds of my wife and another man coming from the next room. A room where we were supposed to stay together. This was supposed to be our trip. But now, here she is, spending our trip with another man on my dime. I paid for their fun. Ironic, isn't it? I can feel my rage building. I know I'm about to explode, and I did. What I saw there left me in shock. But at that moment, I knew that what I was about to do would shock them even more. I will make sure she never walks the same way again. But let's start from the beginning, diving into a story of betrayal, lies, and unexpected, shocking revelations one step at a time. Trust me, what I found out after all of this, what they did, completely justifies the cruel methods of punishment I used. Jessica and I had been planning this trip for months. It was supposed to be one of those rare moments where we could just escape everything. Work, stress, the daily grind, and focus on us. The tickets were booked, the hotel reserved, and everything was perfectly timed to coincide with our anniversary. But life, as it often does, had other plans. The week before we were set to leave, my boss dumped an emergency project on me. Couldn't say no. My role at the company isn't exactly one where you can take liberties, and missing out on this project? It wasn't just a professional risk. It could have cost me my future. When I told Jessica, I expected her to be upset. Maybe a little angry. We'd been counting down to this trip for weeks, after all. But to my surprise, she took it well. Too well, now that I think about it. She sighed and gave me this understanding look. One of those soft, patient smiles that always made me feel like the luckiest guy in the world. "It's okay, Nate," she said. "I mean, it's not like you chose this, right?" I nodded, guilt eating at me. "I'll make it up to you," I promised, meaning every word. "We can rebook for later or take another trip soon. Just not this week." She shook her head. "No, there's no point in wasting all that money. I'll still go. You've been saying for months that I deserve a break anyway. I'll take a few days to recharge and relax. We can plan something together when I get back." It made sense, I guess. The flights and hotel were already paid for, and rescheduling would have been a nightmare. But something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just her words, it was her tone. Like she wasn't as disappointed as I thought she'd be. Still, I brushed the thought aside. Jessica had never given me a reason to doubt her before. "Okay," I said reluctantly. "Just don't have too much fun without me." She laughed lightly, tossing some last-minute things into her suitcase. "I don't think that's possible. Who's going to carry my bags and eat all the seafood I can't finish?" We drove to the airport the next morning, and everything seemed normal, light teasing, her usual chatter about what she'd do first when she got to the resort. I hugged her before she went through security and promised again to make it up to her. "Don't work too hard, okay?" she said, smiling at me over her shoulder as she walked away. "I'll try," I replied. As I watched her disappear into the crowd, that strange feeling crept up again, like there was something I was missing, something just out of reach. But I shook it off. Maybe it was just guilt for letting her go alone. At least that's what I told myself. The work crisis that had turned my schedule upside down was finally under control by the next afternoon. I wrapped up the project faster than I expected, fueled partly by guilt and partly by a stubborn determination to make things right with Jessica. I couldn't stop thinking about her, alone at that resort, without me. So I had an idea. I'd surprise her. The more I thought about it, the more it seemed perfect. She'd wake up and find me there. And it'd be one of those moments she'd talk about for years. "Remember when you showed up out of nowhere and made the whole trip worth it?" I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, not even my assistant. I wanted this to be for Jessica and me alone. Just a grand gesture to show her that even when work got in the way, she always came first. I packed quickly, just enough clothes for a few days, and booked a last-minute flight. The timing couldn't have been better. By the time my plane landed, it was late, and I figured Jessica would already be asleep. The cab ride to the resort felt like forever. I kept imagining her face when she opened her eyes and saw me there. I pictured us laughing over breakfast, walking on the beach together, and making the trip memorable despite the rocky start. When I got to the front desk, I had another idea. Instead of barging in on her unannounced that night, I asked for a room right next to hers. The clerk was happy to help. It wasn't peak season, so there were plenty of vacancies. I checked into my room and tossed my bag on the chair by the window. The sound of the ocean in the distance was calming, and for the first time in days, I felt a little lighter. I stood there for a moment, thinking about how she'd feel when she realized I came all this way just to be with her. I wanted her to wake up, see me, and realize I was willing to do anything for us. I told myself it was a good plan, or at least it felt like one at the time. The room was quiet, the kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of every little sound. The distant crash of the waves outside the window, the occasional murmur of footsteps in the hallway, it all seemed amplified in the stillness of the night. I couldn't sleep, not with the anticipation of seeing Jessica in the morning. I kept imagining her surprise, her smile, the way her eyes would light up when she realized I'd come all this way. But then, as I lay there staring at the ceiling, I heard something. Faint at first, but unmistakable. Laughter. Her laughter. I froze for a moment, straining my ears to be sure. There was no mistaking it. It was Jessica. Came from the room next door. I smiled at first, imagining her FaceTiming with one of her friends, maybe sharing stories about the trip or venting about me missing out. But then I heard another voice. A man's voice. My smile faded instantly. I sat up, every muscle in my body suddenly on high alert. It wasn't just a man's voice. It was a low, confident tone, the kind of voice that didn't belong to a casual phone call or friendly conversation. I couldn't make out everything they were saying at first, but the next words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Are you sure he won't suspect anything?" the man asked. Jessica laughed again, softer this time, almost teasing. "He has no idea what I'm doing right now. This is perfect." I felt my chest tighten, my breathing quicken. My mind raced, trying to piece together some kind of explanation that didn't mean what I knew it meant. But the more I listened, the clearer it became. This wasn't innocent. This wasn't harmless. They were in there together, laughing, talking, plotting. My fists clenched as I swung my legs over the side of the bed. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest, the rush of adrenaline surging through me like a tidal wave. I stared at the wall separating our rooms, the thin barrier between me and the truth I didn't want to face. My mind screamed at me to wait, to think, to calm down. But my heart was roaring, demanding I do something. I couldn't take it anymore. I stormed out of my room and went straight to her door. My hand hovered for a second, hesitating, before I pounded on it with the kind of force that echoed down the hallway. As I stood there in front of her door, my fist still pressed against it from the first knock, memories came flooding back. It was like my mind was trying to pull me back, trying to make me remember who we were before I took the next step. I thought about the first time we met. She was running late to a coffee shop meeting with a friend and accidentally spilled her drink all over me. It should have been an embarrassing disaster, but instead, she laughed nervously, apologized 100 times, and somehow managed to turn it into the best conversation I'd ever had. By the time we parted ways that day, I already knew she was special. We built a life together. I supported her through everything. Her long hours at work, her career changes, her self-doubt during tough times. I was always there, lifting her up, telling her she could do anything. And she always told me I was her rock, the one thing she could count on no matter what. I remembered the way she used to look at me, like I was her whole world. "I'll never betray you, Nate," she once said during a late-night talk about our future. "You're the only person I'll ever need." We had so many plans. We wanted to travel more, maybe start a family in a few years. We talked about buying a little cabin by the lake someday, where we could escape from the chaos of life and just be. But now, as I stood in front of that door, all of it felt like a cruel joke. I was everything to her. I gave her my time, my energy, my trust. And for what? To find myself here on the other side of a door, listening to her laugh with another man? The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. All those promises, all those plans, everything we'd built. It had all been a lie. My jaw tightened, my hands shaking with rage as I stared at that door. This wasn't just betrayal. This was her spitting on everything we had. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't just stand there. I had to know. I had to see it with my own eyes. I stood outside the door for what felt like an eternity, my chest heaving with every breath. I could still hear them, their voices muffled but unmistakable. The sound of glasses clinking, laughter that didn't belong to me, and the low hum of conversation that felt like a dagger to the gut. My mind screamed at me to turn away, to calm down and think it through. But there's only so much a man can take. In one swift motion, I grabbed the door handle and shoved it open. The door banged against the wall, and for a moment, the room froze. Jessica and the man were sitting on the bed, champagne glasses in hand, surrounded by the kind of scene you only see in movies. The dim lighting, the candles flickering on the nightstand, the half-empty bottle of champagne on the table. It all painted a picture I didn't want to believe. Jessica's eyes went wide, her face draining of color. The man next to her, dressed casually but with an arrogance that made my skin crawl, looked equally stunned. For a second, no one spoke. I took a step inside, letting the silence stretch. My eyes darted between the two of them, my rage simmering just beneath the surface. Jessica was the first to break the silence, her voice shaky and desperate. "Nate, this isn't." I raised a hand, cutting her off mid-sentence. "Don't," I said coldly, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. I turned my gaze to the man, who was already shifting uncomfortably. He cleared his throat, trying to muster some kind of explanation. "Look, man, it's not what it looks like." I let out a sharp laugh, taking another step forward. "Oh, really?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. I gestured to the champagne glasses, the candles, the way they were sitting just a little too close to each other on the bed. "So what exactly does this look like?" Jessica stood up then, her hands raised like she could somehow defuse the situation. "Nate, please, just let me explain." I snapped my head toward her, my glare silencing her instantly. "Is this what you call a vacation?" I asked, my tone biting. "I mean, really, Jess, I couldn't make it, so you decided to invite someone else to enjoy the trip I paid for? Nice touch with the champagne, by the way." Her lover tried again, his voice wavering. "Listen, man, I didn't know." This time, I cut him off with just a look. A cold, unflinching stare that shut him up before he could dig himself any deeper. He shifted on the bed, clearly unsure of what to do next. Jessica, on the other hand, was scrambling for words, her excuses tumbling out in a panicked rush. "It's not what you think, Nate. We were just talking. About work. It's nothing, I swear." I couldn't help but laugh again. A bitter, hollow sound that seemed to hang in the air. "Talking about work?" I repeated, shaking my head. "That's the best you've got? At least have the decency to admit what this is." She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't give her the chance. "You know what? Don't bother," I said, my voice low and cutting. "You've already said enough." I turned my attention back to the man, who was now looking anywhere but at me. He wasn't arrogant anymore. He was just a coward sitting there, waiting for this moment to be over. "Get out," I said simply, my voice calm but leaving no room for argument. He looked up at me, his eyes darting toward Jessica like he was waiting for her to save him. She didn't. I didn't need to say it twice. He grabbed his shoes and practically bolted from the room, leaving her standing there alone, her excuses dying on her lips. As the door slammed shut behind him, I turned back to Jessica. She looked at me, her eyes pleading, but I wasn't interested in anything she had to say. "This," I said, gesturing to the room, the champagne, the whole scene, "was your choice, Jess. Not mine." She didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of her downfall. Every lie, every betrayal, it was all about to catch up with her, and I was going to make sure of it. "Nate, listen to me," she said quickly, her voice trembling but trying to sound steady. "It's not what you think." I raised an eyebrow, crossing my arms as I leaned against the dresser. "Oh? Then by all means explain," I said, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. She glanced at the champagne bottle on the nightstand, the two half-empty glasses, and the scattered belongings across the bed. Her eyes flicked back to me, and I could see her scrambling to put together a story. "He's just a friend," she blurted out, her words tumbling over each other. "We were talking about work, I swear. He's helping me with a project, and we were just catching up." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Right?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Because nothing says professional meeting like champagne, candles, and sitting on the bed together. Her face flushed, and she shook her head quickly. "No, Nate, you don't understand. It's not like that. I know it looks bad, but it doesn't mean anything. I promise, nothing happened." I stepped closer to her, forcing her to look me in the eye. "Nothing happened?" I repeated, my tone cutting. "Then why was he asking if I'd suspect anything? Why were you laughing about how I had no idea what you were doing?" Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, her brain scrambling to come up with a response. "I didn't mean it like that," she said finally, her voice weak and unconvincing. "It was just a joke. You know how I joke sometimes, right?" I cut her off with a raised hand, the fury bubbling just beneath the surface of my calm exterior. "Stop," I said firmly. "Just stop. Do you hear yourself right now? Do you even believe the crap you're trying to sell me?" Her eyes darted around the room again, as if searching for something, anything, to back her up. But the evidence was all there. The candles, the champagne, the way she and that guy had looked at me when I burst in. "It's not what it looks like," she cried again, her voice desperate. I shook my head, my gaze never leaving hers. "Save it," I said coldly. "You've already said enough." She lied so easily, but her lies only pushed me further. Every excuse she made, every pathetic attempt to save face, it just confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, and she was about to face the consequences. I didn't go back to my room right away. I needed time to cool down, to think. Pacing the hallway, I couldn't shake the image of Jessica standing there, fumbling through her pathetic excuses. My head was spinning, but one thing was crystal clear. She wasn't telling me the whole story. When I finally stepped into my room, I locked the door and sat on the edge of the bed, my hands gripping my knees. I was furious, but more than that, I needed answers. This wasn't just some random lapse in judgment. Something about it felt planned. Then it hit me, her phone. I knew she synced everything to her iCloud account. It was a habit she picked up years ago when she was using my old phone. And I still had the login. It wasn't something I ever thought I'd need to use. But right then, it felt like the only way to get the truth. I grabbed my laptop, opened the browser, and logged in. The familiar dashboard loaded, and my stomach twisted as I clicked into her messages. Part of me hoped I wouldn't find anything, that maybe, somehow, I was wrong. But deep down, I already knew. It didn't take long. Right at the top was a thread with a name I didn't recognize. My jaw clenched as I clicked on it, and there it was. "Everything's working. He stayed behind. We can enjoy the weekend as planned." I stared at the words, the weight of them sinking in like a heavy stone. My chest tightened as I scrolled further, reading messages that painted a picture I didn't want to see. "Jessica, I'll make sure he can't come. Don't worry, it's all set. Him, you're amazing. Can't wait to see you. Jessica, same. This is going to be perfect." My blood ran cold. She didn't just cheat. She orchestrated it. She wanted me to stay behind. She played me, lied to me, and even roped in someone at work to make sure I couldn't join her. I scrolled down further, and sure enough, there were messages between her and one of my colleagues. "Jessica, thanks for giving him that extra workload. I owe you one." Colleague, "No problem. Anything for you." I slammed the laptop shut, the sound echoing in the silence of the room. My hands were trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. This wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was calculated, premeditated. I sat there for a moment, staring at the wall, feeling the anger boil over again. She thought she could control me, manipulate me like a pawn in her little game. But she didn't realize who she was dealing with. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not by a long shot. The next morning, as the sun came up over the resort, I sat by the window of my room with a cup of bitter coffee, staring out at the waves crashing on the shore. The calmness outside was a sharp contrast to the storm inside me. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns out after a while. What I felt now was something colder, sharper. Jessica had built her world on lies, but she didn't realize how fragile it was. I'd been the foundation of that world, her support, her safety net. And now I was about to take it all away. I opened my laptop and scrolled through the screenshots I'd saved from her messages. The damning text where she coordinated with my colleague to keep me tied up at work. The playful exchanges with her lover about how they'd finally have the weekend to themselves. Every word was another nail in the coffin of her credibility. But that wasn't enough for me. Not yet. I wanted to capture everything, every piece of evidence, every detail of her betrayal. I grabbed my phone, walked into the hallway, and waited. Jessica would have to leave her room eventually. Sure enough, a few minutes later, the door creaked open. She stepped out, looking startled to see me standing there. Her casual resort outfit, a loose sundress and flip-flops, looked out of place on her panicked face. "Nate!" she stammered, her voice already trembling. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer her question. Instead, I pulled out my phone and hit record. "Smile for the camera, Jessica," I said, my tone flat but cutting. Her eyes widened, and she instinctively took a step back. "What the hell are you doing?" "Getting the truth out," I said simply, gesturing with my phone. "You've been working so hard to hide it. Figured I'd give you a hand making it public." "Nate, stop this," she snapped, panic creeping into her voice. "This isn't funny." I raised an eyebrow. "You think I'm joking? After everything I heard last night? After what I found on your iCloud?" I took a slow step toward her. "I know everything, Jess. Every lie, every plan, every message." Her face turned pale as I kept talking. "You orchestrated all of it, didn't you? You made sure I couldn't come. You worked with my colleague to keep me stuck at work, just so you could shack up with that guy. And now you think you're going to walk away from this." She tried to reach for my phone, but I sidestepped her. "Don't even think about it," I warned, my voice low. "You don't get to decide how this ends anymore." "Nate, please," she begged, her voice breaking. "You don't understand. It wasn't like that. I can explain." I let out a bitter laugh. "Explain? You think there's anything you can say that will undo what you've done?" I gestured toward her room. "Go ahead, Jessica. Explain the champagne, the candles, the texts, the man in your bed. I'm all ears." She was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she tried to piece together some excuse. But I wasn't interested in hearing her lies anymore. I walked past her and into her room, my phone still recording. The scene was exactly as I'd left it the night before. The half-empty champagne bottle on the nightstand, the scattered clothes, the rumpled bed. It was all the evidence I needed. I panned the camera around the room, making sure to capture every detail. "This is what betrayal looks like," I said aloud, my voice cold and steady. "This is what she calls a vacation." "Nate, stop!" she screamed from the doorway, but she didn't dare come closer. She knew there was no talking her way out of this. I left her room and went straight back to mine. The rest of the day was a blur of methodical action. I uploaded the video to a private account, ensuring it would reach the right people. Her colleagues, her friends, her professional network. They all deserved to see who she really was. By mid-afternoon, the footage was everywhere. Jessica had spent years building her reputation in her field. She was respected, admired even. But now she was nothing more than a cautionary tale. But I wasn't done yet. I returned to her room later that evening with a new goal. I gathered all her belongings, every article of clothing, every accessory, every personal item, and packed them neatly into her suitcase. I wheeled it out to the hallway and left it in front of her door. On top of the suitcase, I placed a handwritten note. Simple, direct, devastating. You'll never walk the same way again. This is your choice, not mine. When I walked away, I didn't look back. Her world was crumbling, and I didn't need to see it. I knew what I'd done, and I knew she'd never recover from it. That was enough for me. After everything was said and done, I packed my bags and left the resort. I didn't feel the need to say another word to Jessica. Her tears, her excuses, her desperate attempts to salvage the situation. They didn't matter anymore. She'd made her choices, and now she would have to live with them. When I got home, the first thing I did was contact a lawyer. There wasn't a shred of hesitation in me. The woman I'd married was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. A liar, a manipulator, a cheat. The divorce papers were drawn up within days, and I made sure they hit her like a freight train. She wasn't just losing me. She was losing everything she'd taken for granted. Meanwhile, her world was falling apart faster than I could have imagined. The video I posted had spread far beyond her professional circle. Her name, once respected, was now synonymous with betrayal. Job offers dried up. Friends turned their backs on her. Even her family, who had always adored her, distanced themselves. Without her reputation, she had nothing to fall back on. The lavish lifestyle she'd grown used to, gone. The security she thought she'd always have, gone. The man she'd cheated with, he disappeared the moment things got messy. She was left with nothing but the wreckage of her own making. And me? I moved forward. I threw myself into rebuilding my life, piece by piece. I focused on my work, my health, and my future. I reconnected with friends I drifted from, made new ones, and rediscovered what it felt like to be free, free of lies, free of manipulation, free of someone who never really deserved me. People often ask me if I regret what I did, if I ever think about giving her a second chance. My answer is always the same. No, not for a second. What she did wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, a deliberate act of betrayal. And her downfall was the consequence of that choice. I'll never forget the moment I walked away from her for good. That was the moment I truly reclaimed my life. She thought she could control me. I tell myself sometimes, thinking back to it all. But her game backfired. Now, every step she takes will remind her of what she lost. And that's enough for me.